So, screen is blank, the room is full. It's the last talk, and do we have, this end should be all right. We just try to. Yeah. Good. So I want to talk about something I don't have really good words to describe it yet. And hence I just talk about new mobility and something I call casual computing. So I'll try to, in this talk, define what this means. But before we get to that, I want to return a little bit into sort of history mixed with the present. So this is a picture I found on Flickr. And when I started working, sort of designing phone UIs and working in phone concepts, I actually never could have dreamt that we could get a reaction like this from users. And it is just the fact that we are absolutely, passionately addicted to phones. And we use them everywhere. And the phone is the most affordable consumer object of aspiration. And you aspire to get a phone. And there are now phones in every price range. So you can, if you want to buy a phone that costs you £200,000. It's a Vertu with a funky snake which is encrusted in diamonds. I've had it in my hand. I wouldn't aspire to it. But this object, still, when you walk around anywhere in the world, you see it on cafe tables. This really puzzled me. Why are people still putting it on the cafe table? It's like, what's the message? So this object has become some sort of extension of the personality. And it has, during its evolution, gone through big transitions. One of the first transitions was the emergence of the smartphone. And this cover is very dear to me. I have it framed, of course, because I thought it was so smart. It is so economist that to take the scene from Stanley Kubrick's 2001, when the sort of gorillas see the monolith and get sort of magnetized by the monolith, and then suddenly figure out to use a tool to sort of start evolving the species. The 7650 that it's depicted here was the first smartphone. And I was of the opinion, when I saw the Palm Pilot in 96, I was of the opinion that pen-based experience is not going to be the dominant design. So the same utility you can do like this. And hence I started something that became Series 60 and is sort of now 12 years on, it's starting to hit the sort of hockey curve. So things take a long time. And hence this one, if you work in the mobile business, you need a lot of patience. So if you sort of move from internet and say, hey, I want to get into this mobile business, you need to sort of understand you're moving into telecom time. It's a little bit like Matrix-style bullet time somehow. Now, patience is the virtue. Now, last year, a new sort of morphing of the phone happened. Now, it would be fair to say that this object here would not be called a phone if they wouldn't have called it iPhone, because it's not a phone. It's a PDA with a phone feature. And yet, this brilliant marketing insight of sort of you have to call it something that has some sort of heritage and affordances to get it accepted. These kind of concepts obviously have existed in every phone vendor's lab, and yet it took sort of a new entrant to make it happen. And the reason why it takes typically a new entrant is that the effort to make a mobile phone operating system is just humongous. It takes several thousand engineers to sort of really get it mature and deployed, and it takes sort of for an entry-level mobile operating system is an investment somewhere in $500 million range. There's one company which you all know, which at Barcelona this year, their stand to me resembled mostly a morgue. Motorola. They didn't do that investment. They just said, you know, we can milk this thinness and even have sort of slight and light stroke of genius when you paint it pink and you sort of capture the whole Christmas market in 1 year. Now, to go back in history, this is one of the most significant phones ever done, because the phone face has never been smaller and still above the threshold of what is ergonomically acceptable. It sold more than 10 times the expected volumes. And needless to say, it made a lot of money. After this, something interesting started to happen. The phone started to grow. It grew, and it grew with the screen. So the screen grew, and here, if you, on the left, you had 84 by 48 pixels. On the right, you have 176 times 208 pixels. Now that transformation took significantly longer than we had ever anticipated. And now the width, if I recall, it was somewhere around 56 of the 7650. And incidentally, 56 is also the width of a credit card, which is also the width of a cigarette pack, which is sort of a comfortable size to have in your hand. So if you take an average of, you know, the whole human race, 56 is a magical measure. So then in January last year, Apple launched something that was 61. I actually found accidentally when I went into the long tail of myself, I found an old PowerPoint that somebody had sort of some PowerPoints that I did around 2001, and I said at 61 the object becomes something different. You can go and search it if it's interesting for you. Now, I was of the opinion that you cannot do good one-hand use with the iPhone. And at the keynote, you know, Steve was using it like this, and so I was somewhat skeptical. Of course, I had to get one, had it for a while until some idiot stole it. It was usable with one hand. And I have sort of average Caucasian male hands. So I had to sort of step back and say, yeah, you can do stuff with one hand. And it hence is still a phone. So if it's not an object that cannot be used with one hand, then it tips out to be not a phone in my book. So one-hand use is like a core definition of phone for me. Second core definition, it needs to fit in the pocket. So what we have now, if you take these sort of devices, you have a new race in the mobile phone business. It's a game of chicken, where who has balls to put a bigger display in the pocket. Now, this race is a big race. It's like these tables in the closed rooms in Las Vegas where you need to put those golden chips on the table. And the risk is that you won't be able to test this with consumers. And trust me, they have tested every millimeter permutation of everything many times over globally with masses of people. But the magic is that that's just sort of dead, clay or wood or plastic or something. It's not until you have an experience to sort of liven it up. And then that experience typically at best is sort of wired to a computer, or if you really invest in it, you could like have it running over some sort of wireless connection and you have a computer in the backpack. But then you already are at the prototyping fidelity that might take, a year to do. So you are building something where you then have this sort of size and you push it too big. And then the experience has to kind of come and rescue you so that you get the users to move over to the next millimeter hump. So the hump in the sort of Nokia brain was sort of 56. And if you look at the Sony Ericsson Xperia, and I met the guy in Barcelona who sort of had it, and I managed to talk myself into getting it in my hand, and then we had like a discussion about width. And he was Japanese, and he felt like, oh, and it has to be this width. And it's like, oh, yeah, I think it's really cool, but I think it's too narrow. You've seen pictures of the Nokia Series 60 Touch. We don't know exactly what size it's going to be yet, but aspect ratio looks quite narrow. And width, of course, is the magical thing that brings sort of the experience to life. Now, we're in some sort of there starts to be this continuum of convergence. And it exists because, A, the market is so gigantic, the cost segmentation is so rich, and the difference between a computer and a phone is starting to diminish. Intel hasn't managed to get into the phone business because it just cost-wise not been possible yet. And trust me, they've been quite keen to get there. And Paul Ottolini in a really important interview in FT maybe 6 weeks ago said that the difference between phone and PC is diminishing. You don't see the difference from a sort of technical architecture point of view. Now, most of this convergence discussion and most of the money and most of the effort goes into sort of pushing the boundary of what is a phone. So sort of in this sort of 56, 62, 65 millimeter range. And it's, of course, super interesting. Now, 3 devices, 3 architectures, 3 OSs, at least 1.5 billion of investment in those 3 things there. That is going to be one gigantic battle. The device in the background, the Nokia's tablet, that to me, one needs to not think of as a product. It's not a product. It is the world's most beautiful macro board. And a macro board, for those of you who have been in engineering, is this kind of thing when the engineers manage to cobble all the chips together on like something that size, and they get the software up and running for the first time. And then you can start debugging. Now, this is a pretty debugging device. And what they're doing is they're doing public debugging, which is really clever. So it's kind of participatory design of an operating system. Now, it's still, and when then people sort of talk about it online and say, oh, it's like too clunky and too big and this and that, and the software doesn't work. And of course it doesn't work because it's a prototype. It's just lab stuff. They still have the stomach to charge for it, which we can then have a separate conversation about. Now, the most interesting device I find is the iPod Touch. Could you imagine if the iPod Touch would have been introduced first before the iPhone. Wouldn't have worked. So it probably was quite far ready already, and they had sort of their product planning sorted out. It is interesting because it's sold as a music device, a better music device. But obviously it is something different. And this is something I call a casual computer. And why is it a casual computer? And what does this casual mean? Casual means that you can take it out in almost any social context and not ruin the context. Can you imagine taking out your laptop at a restaurant and sort of quickly check your emails? It's just not socially acceptable. You can take out this. Casuality is speed from sort of taking it from somewhere, pocket, bag, to usage. So short, I don't know how short, some academic can figure that out, defines casuality. It's sort of instantly on is casuality. And that starts to change the whole way we use these devices. And now if you go online, and so if you have a website, the way the device identifies itself, it identifies it as an iPhone, which is, of course, Apple's wonderful, tactic to not reveal how much of these they're selling. But this type of connected gizmo, which is sold as something else, but is actually used as a completely different device, these kind of things I find extremely exciting. Now let's turn to the other side of the sort of equation, the shrinking laptop. The laptop has been driven by completely different sort of mechanism. It's been driven from the corporate point of view. It's been driven it's sort of utility driven. It is configured by the IT department. And what we're seeing is that there's been a sort of miniaturization primarily driven by the Sony guys, and also early on by Toshiba and the Libretto, which is sort of quite iconic products. Now, again, when you go further down the size of the laptop, something really magical has happened that Negroponte really driven was sort of say, I'm going to make a $100 laptop. And then, of course, everyone was scratching, what the hell, how do you do a $100 laptop? And there is some interesting and advanced technology in it, but what I really like is the Asus E. How many of you have used the Asus E? So if you work in experience, you better, get one, because it's going to be significant. So I was saying in another conference, I was saying that I suspect that 500 million of these are going to be sold in 5 years' time. And then people were saying, Christian, where did you get that figure? Well, I just made it up. Now, but what if I'm right? What if 500 million are going to be sold? Then, fortunately, I got nice support, not orchestrated from the audience. There was a guy from Intel, sort of some director of strategy, said, yeah, we're also scratching our heads, we don't know what the elasticity is down here. And having been working in the phone business, and particularly at Nokia, that volume is all in the low end. And if you can control the low end by manufacturing and brand and experience and distribution, you're going to have a pretty nice business. So Asus, I listened to the investor relations speech from they had some sort of speech from the CEO. He compares himself to that he's number 3 of PC manufacturers. It's Apple, Sony, and Asus. And what they do, these Taiwanese guys, they said, we build cheap and good design. And the Asus E is white. And when you make a product that is white, it is a color that correlates with sales because it doesn't put anyone off. White is typically a color women like more, and guys can kind of accept it. The E is a nice, wonderful pearly white, so it's even better. It costs $2.99. So again, the other half of the human race, the women, who in this time is like some kind of, there's some sort of reverted Venusian Martians, you know, these John Gray's kind of way of thinking of men, where men is like all about sort of features and sort of, and women are more about kind of emotions. Now this is reversed in the PC business because guys want megahertz and bigger screens and more, RAM, and women are like, cheap, good. So they're like the rational PC buyers. And the E is small, so it fits in the handbag. So women don't have to buy these big clunky bags that looks like, make them look retarded. They want to be stylish and beautiful and, and hence, the E is just sort of perfect. And again, in the same conference, again, sort of this support, there was two slightly older ladies. And then when I gave roughly this type of story about kind of women are going to love it, they both pulled out the E's and waved. And the guys were like, the hell, you're not supposed to have that kind of stuff. And again, women have slightly smaller hands than men. And then if you look at another sort of part of the human race is children. And again, smaller hands. And again, lower cost. So, I mean, you have to be a pretty wealthy person to give your kids, a Mac. You don't have to be super wealthy to give them an E. And, $2.99 if it breaks, and they spill Coke over it, it's like not the end of the world. And when I showed it, I did my sort of au pair and wife test. I asked them, so what does this ePC cost? They just guessed it's like 100 off. So like 25% off in the way they sort of assume the value of it. And then when I go and show them the N95, 8 gigabytes, like 100 less. So there's some sort of perception of value that a PC is more valuable than a phone, because obviously phones have been always free. So the value perception has been corrupted. Now, the E in itself doesn't make it new mobility. Now, what makes it new mobility is this little thing. This is a 3G dongle. They cannot make enough of them. Huawei has 80% market share. In 2007, 436,000 of these were sold in Sweden. There are 9 million Swedes. This is the first time this trillion-dollar industry has figured out to sell you two. They sell you a 30 euro subscription for your phone, and they sell you a 10 euro subscription for a dongle. They sell you two. And then you multiply that with lots of users, and this is a real simple thing for them to sell. It doesn't take much space up. It's not complicated. I mean, there's some drivers and there is some complication to it, but it's essentially a simple thing for them to sell. My friends and operators said, Christian, we can't get enough of them. And this is the start of something new. Now, this is also interesting because anyone who's making hardware would say, this is Christian, this is real silly, this is a commodity. They're paying 23% this GSM tax on it, and it's a commodity. See, I don't think about it like that. I think about it, you put it in, and you have like the biggest freaking mobile phone UI ever made. But of course, nobody has thought about making any meaningful software on it yet. But I hope I'm getting some orders soon. Now, when you stick it into an E, you are starting to get this kind of offers. So T-Mobile in UK is offering free E with a sort of data, broadband data connection. SFR in France has a free broadband. And I think in a few years' time, once there is some evolution in the software, which I'll get to in a moment, I truly believe that this form factor is just really perfect. Because it's, you know, a clamshell, so it protects the screen, which is a very vulnerable part. It leaves room for a keyboard. Keyboard's cheaper than another screen, so I'm sure some of you have seen the sort of XO 2.0 version where they have like 2 screens. Yes, maybe computers will go to that type of experience, but the tactility of keys, and particularly the cost of making key mats, is going to be lower than making another screen. So more of them will look like this. And the most important thing is you don't have to be some sort of giant marketing rocket scientist to sell this to consumers. It's just, there's an inherent benefit of it. It's a laptop. Just like the iPhone, it's a phone. Now, before we go to the sort of evolution of that, I want to talk about the MacBook Air a little bit. So, the MacBook Air again launched. All the sort of Mac heads turn into their, you know, chief priest and watch the keynote, and so did I, and sort of watching the blogs. So like people were disappointed. It's like, oh, was this all? And looking at the specs, and people said no DVD and no this and no that, and so I thought, gee, this is, you know, there's something fishy here. So I think, maybe I'll have to get one. I'll go and check it out. And of course, you know, you go into the Mac store and you sort of look at it and say, oh, you know, and then of course you walk out with one. But there's still something fishy. And what is fishy with it? Now, a typical Mac user cannot, so there's 3 hooks that Apple has. They have the OS, they have iTunes, and they have iPhoto. Those are the hooks. If you have a little bit more, you cannot get those 3 hooks in 80 gig, and you can certainly not get it in 60 gigs. So why on earth is Steve making a product where he doesn't have his hooks in the device? So this kind of got me thinking. Then I was thinking, well, that's not so hard. You just take a USB port and you replicate. You have an external hard disk, and then you can get it to work. Well, I can't get it to work. So I went to the Genius Bar in Regent Street, and 1 hour, 26 minutes later, he couldn't get it to work. He looked on his computer, it works. Well, can you get it to work? No, we can't get it to work. So, and my brother sells Macs, so I asked him, can you get it to work? No, he can't get it to work. Now I've managed to get it to work somehow, but I'm still not getting to work so that it actually enables me to have all those 3 hooks in a sort of experience. Secondly, you know, it doesn't have that DVD drive. So again, it's a question of sort of disrupting a distribution business. So I made a promise I'm not going to buy any DVDs, and I know when I bought that machine, so I said, okay, that's when I stopped buying DVDs. Maybe meaningful in the long term. Now, they also launched Time Capsule. And again, Time Capsule wasn't available right away. It was, when it launched, it had still some issues with it. And then they had a sort of major patch, very typical to Apple. They kind of get the software out, and it sort of works, and then they do a patch, you know, a few days later. And the Time Capsule combined with .Mac starts to smell like something to me. And thing which then triggered this final thought was this some blog in Japan that had kind of done a massive teardown of the machine. And it's like beautiful on the outside, stupid inside. Because so much space is wasted, so they could have had crammed more in it. And of course, when you then look at the ThinkPad X300 ads, and the headline is "into thin air," like, oh fuck, these guys don't get it. It's not about these features. It is about something else. So what Apple is, in my opinion, executing is the AirBook strategy. And the AirBook strategy is something, a little smaller Mac thing with kind of not so much stuff in it, which probably will cost maybe $500. And then it's nicely hooked to a time capsule where they sell you some extra hardware. It's hooked to a sort of super.Mac, and suddenly you have a real functional cloud computer. I talked to some sort of engineers who've been looking at the Time Machine, and they said, Christian, this is amazing software. How can they get that package so small and have like daily increments of files? And you can just with one go, you can delete all of those increments. And it's like, this is amazing software. So I take the word for it and say that Apple is executing some strategy that most guys don't even realize. And that's what they do typically in front of the eyes. But, since they're brilliant at marketing, they're selling you thin. And, of course, stupid me buys thin. Now, back to that Asus. So the Asus is the Mac for the rest of us. And it will be a similar battle, like the early battle between Nokia and Ericsson, where it's like, Finland against Sweden. It's like, classic battle. And now it's kind of Asus against Acer. And the Asus guys are some sort of company that's backed by some shipping families. They ain't going to run out of money. And Acer, I'm still figuring out, what is behind it, but it looks reasonably tight and managed to kind of get to the third or fourth biggest laptop manufacturer in just a few years. Now, Steven Wildström from Business Week wrote a couple of weeks ago reviewing the HP. And of course, everyone has rushed into this low-cost, ultra-mobile PC market. So it's going to be hyper-competition. Hyper-competition means two things: better stuff, lower prices. So maybe 500 million will happen. He wrote that this is really great, but the UI doesn't work. Microsoft restarted the XP program just to be able to get to this market, because Vista just doesn't run on hardware like this. And well, who gives a toss? It's anyway, Gmail and Facebook that the users are using. So they're only using services in the cloud. So it's just an access to the cloud services. So what we're tossing around with in Fjord is this: we're saying hardware is the service. And then when I talked to some Sony guys about this, they said, they're selling €1,500 small laptop. And they was like, how can we make, and then let's say they make 15% margins there. How can you make some money in a $299 with that model? To me, they said, we're not going to go into that business, because they're just asking the wrong questions in my mind. Because you cannot think about this as kind of a business of hardware. You have to think about it as a total service business. And now Asus is starting to build a layer of software here. And what I'm seeing is, again, the same type of thing, that you have hardware and software controlled by the same party. That's what Apple's done, that's what Nokia's done, and that's how you have to play the game. Now, And where the whole thing then gets interesting is, so the dongle becomes a kind of small chip. It gets embedded into the device, and the E turns into a phone. But it's not a phone from like this point of view. It's a phone from a business system point of view. It's bought by the operators. It's given to the consumers as a service. So it's not going to be the Best Buys who are going to buy them. They're not going to have the cycles of hardware. So immediately when ASUS is ready with the hardware and can ship it, they'll ship it. No, they're going to wait so that they sell it to the operators, they test it. And because obviously, when somebody will buy, 1 million E's, I'm sure that they will, listen. And when you have several players buying 1 million of them, then obviously they are willing to adjust their roadmaps. So the whole transformation happens then in that the PC becomes a phone. And Carphone Warehouse, CTO has says that their goal is to make the laptop the next phone. And they just had that big investment merger with, I think, Best Buy or somebody in the US and going to roll out a massive amount of stores. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to change the sort of whole hardware model into a service model. And why is this important? Again, think about the first picture. We love hardware. I've been in the sort of software business of a hardware business and trying to sort of market our UIs and like done a crap job at it. And because it's just like, it's not interesting. Every time the guys came up with, let's say, a blue phone or a purple phone, it's like infinitely more interesting in some than some new kind of clever features we came up with. So what does this new thing, I don't know what to call it, I call it a casual computer, what does it need to have? It needs to have an improved 9-inch experience. Somewhere 9 to 10 inch is a sort of sweet spot. It's still hand-baggable. It is female hand comfortable. It's child comfortable. And then the experience should be slightly more consumery. I don't know what it means yet. It needs to have sort of platform-agnostic video calling, meaning that you can just initiate a video call over the cellular network. And having my two daughters kind of grown up on using Skype, my daughter was in vacation in Finland, and suddenly I get a video call. And my daughter says, "Cuckoo." And I was like, "What the hell? You're calling a video call? You're 6. For them, video is default, voice is broken. Why is there not video, Daddy? I can't see you, Daddy. So these kids are growing up with a totally different kind of mental model. It needs to have some sort of BlackBerry always-on connectivity. So, it's closed, it's sort of sleeping, BlackBerry style, but emails come in. Your sort of status updates come in. Your stuff gets dropped. So when you open it up, boom, it's there. And one of the things I've discovered with the MacBook Air, because when the laptop weight goes down to 1 kilo, it is at such a weight that you can carry it all day long. You don't get tired. Because it wakes up faster than any other machine, you really sort of take it up and you sort of check your plane reservation, which you would never do. And I still remember seeing sort of people when they take out their Windows machine and then they sort of log on to their secure ID and they get into their email, and it's like, God, are you going to get this done anytime soon? I want to catch the plane. Now you can do it roughly as fast as you do it with a phone. And then it needs to have some this seamless cloud computing, and seamless is not seamless but it's designed with seams. But I can't express that condensely, but it is, that's what I'm meaning. And that means sort of something like what the Google guys are working on with this Google Gears is extremely interesting, where you have cached cloud computing. That, I think, is massively interesting. And then, of course, it needs to have unified messaging, so you can send text messages and instant messages. And then I think it needs to have hardware-driven presence. So presence plus a sort of a Twitter or a tweet or some sort of microblogging, that type of what am I doing now, the kind of now message, that one should be visible, you know, at sort of a glance. And that, of course, can be done for almost no money in a separate little LCD on it. So that takes us to the end of the journey of the casual computer. I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are some.